Hi, I'm Julie Farkas, Director of the Novi Public Library, and welcome to Let's Read. Today I am joined by Michael Zadoorian, author of Beautiful Music, which is this year's 2019 community read for our community of Novi, Northville, South Lyon, Lyon Township, Wixom, and Walled Lake. 6 libraries coming together to read this fabulous book. Michael, thank you for joining me today.
Thanks for having me. It's an honor to have all those libraries participating, all for my book. It's kind of thrilling.
And you had an amazing book this year. I'll share with you that there were some criteria to why we wanted your book. We were looking for a fiction title. We were looking for something related to Michigan. We love supporting Michigan authors.
Thank you.
And finally, we were looking for something that wrapped around the late 1960s, early 70s, because the city of Novi was celebrating its 50th anniversary as a city.
Okay.
So in all of our committee, sitting down and going through titles, your title popped up and became this year's fantastic read.
Well,
so congratulations.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here and happy to be here talking about the book.
I am too, and I'm so glad that you were able to give me a little bit of your time today so that I could share with the community of Novi who you are and a little bit about your book today. I have questions, so let's dive right in. Okay. My first question, and I think this is always a burning question for people when they're wanting to know about an author and a book, is what is it that inspired you to write Beautiful Music?
I think I really wanted to write like a sort of coming of age story through music. Music was really important to me in my teen years, and I really think it had a lot to do with kind of making me the person, the adult that I became. And the more I wrote the book, the more I realized, the music really did affect me a lot. And I think in a lot of ways it even sort of kind of turned me into a writer in many ways.
I love all of the different types of music that you incorporate into the book. In fact, you and I talked a little bit before the interview that I literally sat down with this book and read and listened at the same time. And I encourage anyone to do the same if you're going to pick up this book. So it was a whole different experience. I was getting the words, but I was getting the music at the same time. And I just thought that was so cool for you to incorporate both. The character Danny, talk a little bit about that character. Is that you? Is there, I felt like sometimes it was autobiographical.
Yeah, well, and there are definitely things about Danny that are quite autobiographical. I was in some ways just sort of a quiet, nerdy kid, and some of his hobbies were some of my hobbies, model car building, and later he becomes obsessed with music, and which is very much what happened to me. I think I discovered rock music, and it sort of changed so much about me, and I think really, kind of turned me into, someone with, I think it became a way to sort of, music becomes, I think when you're a teenager, music becomes, I think, part of your identity. And it starts to, indicate to you what kind of person you are and what your interests are and who your peer group is and who the people that you're going to like and be attracted to, and that all sort of comes about for Danny in the book, and it certainly was that way for me. I really wanted to write that kind of how music changes you, how it reflects your identity at a time of your life when you're still trying to figure out who you are exactly. And and I think it wasn't just for me, and I think for so many generations, no matter what you're listening to, if you grew up with doo-wop or hip-hop or, garage rock or indie rock or whatever, that music still resonates with you as you get older, and it's really just stays with you. It becomes part of who you are.
Well, it definitely was inspirational for me. I mean, I recognized a lot of the music, in the book, but then also what I loved is how you tied in the character of Danny with his dad and that wonderful relationship that they have, and some really unique music that his father introduced him to, which had I not read your book, I would have never thought to even, pull it up and try to listen to it, and yet you incorporate that as well.
I did. It was sort of important that Danny and his father kind of bond over music, but it also did not make sense that Danny's father would be listening to the music of the 60s and 70s rock music, but that Danny's relationship with his dad is definitely part of where he gets his love of music, and they listen to a lot of kind of, I guess you could call it easy listening music, or, some people might even nowadays call it lounge music, that sort of thing. And so my dad used to actually listen to a lot of that. So it was fun for me to incorporate some of that into their story, because I grew up with listening to a lot of that sort of stuff. So it was interesting to have that, to plant the seed of Danny's love of music with the music he listens to with his dad, which is kind of orchestral, sort of. Also a lot of orchestral versions of rock songs, really, and then have it kind of flower once Danny's father is no longer part of the story, to have that love of music flower into something completely different that also becomes a huge part of Danny's identity.
Well, and I also love too how you brought in so many different Michigan landmarks. You talk about how you use, real places. So it allows the reader to identify right with Corvettes or, the radio stations that were, of that time. And I felt like I was going down memory lane and then connecting with my parents and what they were listening to, or other people from that time period.
Yeah, it's been really interesting to see how people have, for me, sometimes part of the interest of writing fiction is sort of creating a world and then sort of furnishing it in a way. And Danny's world is filled with things like going to Corvettes for his albums, which he does with his father as well, or just the things in his neighborhood. And it felt important to me I wanted it to really feel of that era. Right. And so, it was important to have it, to have a real sense of place. Danny grows up in Northwest Detroit. And so those are the kinds of places people went to. And in his high school, which was the high school that I attended as well. And for a while I felt like, do I have to make up a fictional Detroit high school? And I thought, no, why would I do that? I knew that high school, I knew that neighborhood. And Danny essentially, the house he grows up in is the house that I grew up in. Happily, what happens in Danny's house did not happen, most of which did not happen in my household. But in a lot of ways, I think the character of Danny, for me is like, okay, that could have been me had a few things not gone my way, so.
Along with music, you touch on a lot of other, I think, relevant topics. Racial tension, obviously, from the time period. You talk a little bit about, and mental health and illness is in the book as well. Talk a little bit about that.
It felt really important to me because I think initially I just started writing about music and the love of music, and I started to realize that the book needed to be about something more than that. And you mentioned the radio stations, and Detroit had a lot of really iconic radio stations in the 60s and 70s. CKLW comes to mind. And so there was really a lot in the air at that time. And even though I started writing about the music and the radio stations and everything, it made me also think about what else was in the air at that time, in the years following the 67 rebellion. And there was all this fear and rage and hate and all this ugliness in the air as well. And for me, the book started to come together when I felt that music kind of meeting up in the air with the negative things that were in the air at the time. And that's when the book started to really seem to coalesce for me and started to be, hopefully, to transcend just a kind of standard coming of age story.
Are you a musician yourself?
I am not. No. I have lots of musician friends, and that must be the way. Some of that, and I love music, and it's always been a huge part of my life. And but no, I never really got around to actually playing any instruments.
Well, you do a great job then of, weaving in that music almost, obviously your research and then those that you connect with brings in where I would have thought, wow, he must be a player himself or involved in it. So I love how it's very true. It's very authentic in the book. And I just think that what you've brought there is just fantastic.
Well, there's definitely some things in there about that are almost, for lack of a better word, fetishistic about. Danny talks about the kind of the tactile quality of holding a record album, and then taking it out carefully and putting it on the turntable and turning on the turntable, and that the sound that the needle makes when it connects with vinyl, that there's a little pop and a hiss, and it's all very, and him, about almost being a little mesmerized by the label spinning around, and it's all part of just, the process of it and kind of the ceremony of it for him.
And the artwork that's incorporated into it. I totally can hear that needle, actually. And what's so funny for me is here we are, 30 years later, and we're actually seeing vinyl come back.
Yep.
The library actually has an LP
collection.
Well, we don't have a collection, but we actually have an LP converter, and you can convert LP.
Wow.
In the
great.
library. So we're seeing, people still have collections at home, and should they want to convert them, we have that. But it is coming back.
Absolutely. And the first vinyl record factory, that started. Was just recently opened in Detroit at the Third Man location down in Cass Corridor. Basically, that's the first record plant to open in America in the last 40 years.
Isn't that crazy?
It's so great, and so it was very fun to have people be a little. It's not like writing about wax cylinders anymore. People still understand what an LP looks like and how it feels in your hand, and so it was nice to have that happen at the same time.
Well, and you give younger generations a way to connect, and with them seeing it again, or even I know you mentioned that a lot of the music in the book is actually on Spotify, so you can actually pull it up and listen to it.
There's a beautiful music playlist,
right? And so here, if you want, you can go out and you can literally hear that music that's going on. I feel like, if you ask me, that there could be a sequel to this book, just because of where Danny is, in the book and his age. Have you thought about that? Have you been asked that?
I have been asked that, and I mentioned before that I actually set out to write a different book when I started writing this, and I thought about an adult character, like someone who had been in radio for many years, and but I started thinking about his childhood, and I got so consumed by his childhood that I wound up writing this book, and I am writing the book of Danny 40 years later.
Yay!
Right now.
Well, I'm happy to hear it.
It's the book that I set out originally to write, and so.
Well, good. Then we'll have something to look forward to, because I where you left off, I'm like, I needed more. I wanted that character to continue for me, and I'm sure other readers would also want the same. So I know that you mentioned you are writing a new book. You have something coming out in 2020. Is that book, or is it something new?
No, that's a new book.
Without telling too much, because I know you sometimes can't. What can we expect from you?
It's actually coming out in May of 2020, and it's called The Narcissism of Small Differences. Okay. And it is, again, another very Detroit-oriented book. This one about a kind of creative class couple that, as they approach 40, they've been together for a long time, and without benefit of marriage or children or mortgage, much to the chagrin of their parents. And they kind of have their own sort of midlife crisis, I think. And but it's also about kind of growing up with a sense of, like, perhaps an overdeveloped sense of irony about the world, and when you get to a particular age, that starts to grow, that starts to wear thin. But it's also the story of their relationship, and how they. He's sort of a failed writer. She's a successful ad person, and so as they approach middle age, somehow these don't seem as to go together as well as they used to. And so it's their story, and it's really kind of a comic love story, I think. And I'm still sort of getting used to talking about it. So this is useful. I'm excited,
yeah.
So I think it's very funny. That was my idea, to kind of write a modern day kind of comedy of manners. Even though it's not quite modern day, it takes place in 2009.
Very good. It sounds like a wonderful read that we can look forward to. And I know you've had some fabulous books already published. Secondhand, Leisure Seeker, which was made into a movie, we know. Is it Helen Mirren?
And Donald Sutherland. Last year came out.
So that was a wonderful book that came out and got some wonderful reviews as well. I cannot thank you enough for the opportunity for you to sit down with me today and talk about the book. I hope that everyone in Novi, we will not take these off the shelf yet. We will keep them up for the next few weeks. And even if we take the mass amount that we purchase for the community to definitely read, we will definitely have some in our collection for the future and for those who haven't had a chance yet. But don't worry, we do have copies of it. We can look forward to Michael's new book coming out. And thank you for joining us for Let's Read.